All right, this begins the final preparation for your final quiz, Week 7 quiz prep. So this will be the last quiz you're going to take in this class. And this quiz covers a sentence structure and the different kinds of sentences in English. So let's start right away. So in English, there are three kinds of sentences: simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence. And so the easiest sentence in English is the simple sentence. The simple sentence consists of the subject, verb, object. A sentence is a complete thought, also known as an independent clause. Here are some examples of a simple sentence. Jack gets good grades. Jack is the subject, gets is the verb, good is the adjective, grades is the object. Jack studies hard. Jack is the subject, studies is the verb, hard is the adjective. Mary is short. Mary is the subject, is the verb, and short is the adjective. Steve gambles all the time. Steve loses rarely at the casinos. Here you have Steve as the subject, loses as the verb. Rarely is an adverb. Any word that ends in ly is an adverb. At the casinos, that's a prepositional phrase. Remember, a prepositional phrase always shows place and location. So here you have Mary is a subject, likes is a verb, to dress up is an infinitive phrase. Robert eats steak. Robert is the subject, eats is the verb, steak is the object. Up the hill sits an old house. This is also a simple sentence. So up the hill is a prepositional phrase because it shows location. Sits is a verb. An old house is the subject. So here you have prepositional phrase, verb, and subject, which is a simple sentence. Up the hill sits an old house. Has the same meaning as the old house sits up the hill. Down the street is the police station. Down the street is the prepositional phrase. Is the verb. Police station is the subject. That has the same meaning as the police station, subject, is the verb, down the street, prepositional phrase. The next kind of sentence in English is a compound sentence. Compound sentence has fanboys in it. Fanboys are coordinating conjunctions that join two sentences together. A coordinating conjunction joins two simple sentences together to form a compound sentence. A compound sentence contains two sentences of equal importance joined by fanboys, for and nor, but, or, yet, so. You always have to put a comma before fanboys. Jack gets good grades, for he studies hard. And so here you have an independent clause, a simple sentence, Jack gets good grades, and then you have another simple sentence, he studies hard. So when you have two simple sentences joined by for and nor, but, or, yet, so, this is called a compound sentence. And so for your essay, it's important that you always put a comma before yet fanboys when fanboys is in a compound sentence, or when fanboys connects two independent clauses together. An independent clause is a complete thought. So when fanboys connects two independent clauses, that is two complete thoughts together, then you use a comma before the for. Jack gets good grades, for he studies hard. Jack is tall, but Mary is short. Steve gambles all the time, yet he loses rarely at the casinos. Mary likes to dress up, comma, so she can feel good about herself. Robert eats steak, comma, and he likes to dance. Usually Mr. Smith goes to the park or he goes to the beach to take his walks. So this is the second kind of sentence, and the word compound simply means two of something. So literally this just means two sentences. In other words, Jack gets good grades, one sentence. He studies hard is another sentence, joined together by the conjunction for, and you have a comma in the middle. And each of these sentences are of equal importance. The third kind of sentence in English is a complex sentence. A complex sentence, it starts with a dependent clause. All of these starts with a dependent clause and then an independent clause. All of the words in this chart are all subordinating conjunctions. Whenever you have a subordinating conjunction in a sentence, then that automatically makes that sentence a dependent clause. And a dependent clause is simply an incomplete thought or a sentence fragment. In other words, it is not a complete sentence. So whenever you have although, as long as though, because, before, even though, if, now that, once, rather than, since, so that, then, that, though, in, unless, until, when, whenever, where, whereas, whenever, whether, and while. Whenever you have any of these subordinating conjunctions, you will have a dependent clause. Here are some examples of complex sentences. Remember that complex sentences are formed when you have an independent clause and a dependent clause together in one sentence. As noted in the chart on the above slide, subordinating conjunctions render the sentence a dependent clause. Subordinating conjunctions are part of complex sentences. I retire from my job. There's no subordinating conjunction here, so this is an independent clause. It is a complete sentence. So this is not a dependent clause. If I retire from my job, here you have the subordinating conjunction if. So that renders this entire sentence a subordinating it renders the entire sentence a dependent clause. So if is a subordinating conjunction which turns the sentence I retire from my job into a dependent clause. Once you use a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of a sentence, you need another independent clause to finish the thought, also known as a sentence fragment. An example of a sentence fragment. If I retire from my job. So that's a sentence fragment. And this is also a dependent clause. An independent clause is if I retire from my job, I will live at the beach. So that this is an example of a independent clause, and it's also an example of a complex sentence. All right, so this is a complex sentence. For when we have a complex sentence, you have the dependent clause, if I retire from my job, together with an independent clause, I will live at the beach. So when you put the two of them together, that is known as a complex sentence. So here are more examples of a complex sentence. Complex sentence consists of a dependent clause and an independent clause together in one sentence. In a complex sentence, if you just have the dependent clause alone, if I win the lottery, then you have a sentence fragment. If I win the lottery, that's the dependent clause. I will retire from my job. That's the independent clause. You have to remember that when the dependent clause is in the beginning of the sentence, you must have that comma. Examples of complex sentences. If the subordinate dependent clause is before the main sentence, then you have to use a comma. After John eats dinner, comma, he goes to bed. So here you have a dependent clause that comes at the beginning of a sentence, therefore you have to use a comma. Although Jack is fat, comma, he eats very little. As soon as the alarm clock rings, comma, Steve jumps out of bed. As long as I study hard, comma, I can get good grades. Because Michael Jordan is tall, comma, he plays great basketball. Before I go to bed, comma, I brush my teeth. If I avoid sick people, comma, I can catch fewer colds. Once I get my driver's license, comma, I will buy my own car. Rather than spend a lot of money on clothes, comma, I like to make my own clothes. Since I lost my husband, comma, I have to get a job. Unless you do your job perfectly, comma, you will be fired. When I was younger, I used to have more energy. So the words in the table and the bolded words in this slide are all known as subordinating conjunctions, and subordinating conjunctions is what renders a sentence a dependent clause. And when you have a dependent clause alone, then it is known as a sentence fragment, and it does not stand alone. When the dependent clause is at the end of a sentence, you don't need a comma. So if the subordinate clause, dependent clause, is after the main sentence, do not use a comma. John goes to bed, so that's the main clause, that's the independent clause. After he eats dinner, that's the dependent clause. Together, it forms a complex sentence. And you notice that when the dependent clause comes after the sentence, you don't need a comma there. Whereas here, when the dependent clause, after John eats dinner, he goes to bed, then you need a comma. This is really important, comma usage, because I see this mistake all the time. So let's repeat this again because it's important. So after John eats dinner, when that dependent clause comes at the beginning of the sentence, you need a comma. When that same sentence, John goes to bed after he eats dinner, you don't need a comma. He eats very little, although he is fat, no comma. Steve jumps out of bed, no comma, as soon as the alarm clock rings. I can get good grades, no comma, as long as I study hard. Michael Jordan plays great basketball, no comma, because he is tall. However, if I were to say because he is tall at the beginning of the sentence, Michael Jordan plays great basketball, then you would need a comma. I brush my teeth before I go to bed, no comma. I can catch fewer colds if I avoid sick people. All these sentences are complex sentences. All these sentences are complex sentences. So a sentence fragment would be after John eats dinner. So that's not a complete thought. So when you have a subordinating conjunction, that is a sentence fragment. So you need to know that for the quiz. A complete sentence would be after John eats dinner, he goes to bed. Recap. So that means that in English, you have three kinds of sentences. You have the simple sentence, John eats dinner. John is the subject, eats is the verb, dinner is the object. Then you have a compound sentence where you have fanboys connecting two independent clauses. So fanboys would be for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So here, when any of those coordinating conjunctions combine two different sentences, that's known as a compound sentence. So John eats dinner, comma, and he likes steak. So whenever you have fanboys connecting two sentences together, you need a comma in front of fanboys. Then a complex sentence is when you have a subordinating conjunction and a dependent and an independent clause together in one sentence. So although John eats dinner late, comma, he likes to eat steak. And so when you put a dependent clause or a sentence fragment together with an independent clause, you have a complex sentence. And then you have to remember that when the dependent clause comes at the beginning of the sentence, like although John eats dinner late, you need to put a comma there. So in a nutshell, you have three kinds of sentences. John drinks water, simple sentence. John drinks a lot of water, but he is still thirsty, compound sentence. Although John drinks water, he is still thirsty. Complex sentence. Now, one interesting thing about the difference between a compound and complex sentence, if you're a writer, so what's the difference in meaning between these two sentences? And so when I say John drinks a lot of water, but he is still thirsty, these two sentences have equal importance. But if I say, although John drinks a lot of water, then this dependent clause is not as important, and then he is still thirsty is the important sentence. So in a complex sentence, you have one sentence that's not important and one sentence that is important. Whereas in a compound sentence, both sentences are of the same importance. So for the writer, it's a stylistic choice of how you want the reader to read your sentence. So here's the difference. If I were to talk, and if I were to say this sentence, I would say something like, John drinks a lot of water, but he is still thirsty. Now, if I were to say it with a complex sentence, where this sentence is less important, although John drinks a lot of water is less important, while he is still thirsty is more important, I would say it like this. Although John drinks a lot of water, he is still thirsty. That's the difference. And so it is up to you, the writer, to decide if you want to use a compound sentence for your essay or if you want to use a complex sentence. And then when you use a complex sentence, the second sentence is emphasized. And another kind of sentence which I did not put into my notes is that John drinks a lot of water, comma, however, he is still thirsty. This is when you use this is a conjunctive adverb, but it's still a compound sentence. This is still, when you use a transition word, like however, that's what I didn't add in my notes. If you use a transition word like however, it also has this similar meaning, and in other words, both sentences are almost equal, okay? So here, when you use but, the sentences are totally equal. When you have John drinks a lot of water, however, he is still thirsty, then this sentence is slightly more important than this sentence. But when you use a complex sentence, then this sentence is way less important than this sentence. And once again, it's all about stylistics. It's all about what you, the writer, want to say. Also remember that if you choose to use a transition word, you need to use a semicolon before the transition word and then a comma. I will do much when we do the when I give my lecture on the comparison contrast essay. I'm going to give a whole lecture about transition words and about different kinds of transition words. So this is a transition word. However, this is a transition word of opposition. And so I'm going to cover the many different kinds of transition words of opposition. I believe it's the week 8 lecture in which I go over all the different kinds of transition words that you can use for your comparison contrast essay. But just for now, all you have to know is this is a compound sentence because it functions. Transition words function in a similar manner as coordinating conjunctions. And so here I will go over, but all you have to know is this is a compound sentence because you have no subordinating conjunctions. The way you can tell if something is a complex sentence is all of these words, subordinating conjunctions. As soon as you have any of these words at the beginning of the sentence or in the middle of a sentence, then you know instantly that you have a dependent clause and you have a subordinating, you know you have a dependent clause. Any of these words, as well as who, what, where, and that. I believe I didn't put that into the, so here you have examples of, and a recap. So what I've done so far is go over the different kinds of sentence structure in English. Simple, compound, and complex. Here are some week 7 quiz questions about your sentence structure. So you need to memorize these sentences. So if you aren't going to make it, please call. This is a complete correct sentence. It is a complex sentence. So in your quiz, they're going to ask you the question like, if you aren't going to make it, please call. What kind of sentence is this? Is this a simple sentence, complex sentence, or a compound sentence? Then you're going to have to learn to recognize, well, this is a complex sentence because it's got a dependent clause with the subordinating conjunction if. So if you aren't going to make it is a dependent clause, and then please call. Okay, that is an imperative, which is still considered a declarative sentence, but it's like a command. Please call. It's an independent clause. It's a complete thought. So when you have a dependent clause with a complete thought together in one sentence, that's a complex sentence. It takes skill to call in sick to work with a phony excuse. This is a simple sentence because you have no coordinating conjunctions. There's no and, but, for, no, so, yet, so it's not a compound sentence, and you don't have a subordinating conjunction, if. So that's how you know that this is a simple sentence. And then it takes skill. Skill is the subject. Verb is takes. To call in sick with a phony excuse is an infinitive phrase. First of all, one must be sure to speak directly to the boss. This is a simple sentence because first of all is an adverb placer. One is a subject. Must is a modal of necessity. Be sure is an infinitive. Actually, this whole thing is an infinitive phrase. Be sure to speak directly to the boss. So here you have a simple sentence. Today I will be making appointments on the phone. This is a correct sentence. And so today is an adverb placer of time. I is the subject. Will be making is the verb. Appointments is the object. On the phone is the prepositional phrase. When I was 4, my father taught me how to ride a bike. This is a correct sentence. It is a complex sentence because when I was 4 is the dependent clause, and then my father taught me how to ride a bike is a sentence. This is incorrect. At the age of 4, my father taught me to ride a bike. So your father was 4 years old when he taught you to ride a bike? Incorrect. I could tell the room had been dusted, for all the pictures were crooked. This is a compound sentence. So all of these sentences in blue means that these are the exact sentences that show up on your quiz, and then they're going to ask you, is this sentence correct or not correct? Or it will ask you, is this a simple, compound, or complex sentence? So you have to be able to identify what kind of sentence it is, be able to tell why it's that way, and be able to tell if it's a correct or incorrect sentence. The next thing we're going to learn about is dangling modifiers. Dangling modifiers occurs when a modifier does not logically refer to other words in the sentence. In a dangling modifier sentence, the sentence is missing a subject. This is really important to understand. So let me repeat that again. In a dangling modifier sentence, the sentence is missing a subject. So this is a very common mistake in essay writing. So here you have visiting the zoo. The birds chirped loudly. What, the birds are visiting the zoo? No, it's visiting while I was visiting the zoo. The birds chirped loudly. And so here you have missing the subject of the sentence. And so when you have a missing subject, this is known as a dangling modifier. So here, this is the correct one. Walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. What kind of error is in this sentence? This is walking on, so that means that your car walked on the sidewalk? No. So the correct way of saying is, while I was walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. And so when you have all of these in red, are all going to be on your quiz. So on your quiz, it's going to say, walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. And then it's going to ask you, what kind of error is it? Is this a dangling modifier or a misplaced modifier? And a dangling modifier, it is a dangling, the kind of error it is, the answer to that question, dangling modifier. Okay, that's the answer, because it's missing a subject. So it should be, while I was walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. Here you have, while working, an earthquake shook the building. Oh, so the earthquake was working at its job and while it shook the building? That doesn't make sense. So an earthquake cannot work and have a job. So the correct answer should be, while I was working, an earthquake shook the building. So what kind of error is in this sentence? Dangling modifier. Having finished the assignment, the TV was turned on. Oh, so the TV did your homework for you? The TV then walked over and turned itself on? No. So after I finished my assignment, I turned on the TV. And so that's the correct sentence. So therefore, this sentence has a dangling modifier mistake. So who finished the assignment and who turned on the TV? That's the missing subject. And so many times, a dangling modifier sentence is actually very funny. Imagine that your TV grew legs and then did your homework for you, then it walked over and turned itself on. So you got to think of it that way, in a kind of, that's how you can remember, oh, okay, this is a dangling modifier. It's missing a subject. Having arrived late, a written excuse was needed. Oh, really? So your piece of paper got up and arrived late into a classroom? I don't think so. So that means that after I arrived late in the classroom, a written excuse was needed by the teacher. Did you notice that I had to add in my subject? I arrived late. Who arrived late? You know, there's no who, and therefore it's missing a subject. So therefore, this is a dangling modifier mistake. And so on your quiz, it's going to ask, what kind of error is this sentence? And you're going to write down dangling modifier. So this sentence is also a dangling modifier mistake. At the age of 4, my father taught me to ride a bike. Oh, so that means your father was 4 years old and he taught you to ride a bike? So who was 4 years old? So that means when I was 4 years old, my father taught me to ride a bike. And so once again, this is missing a subject. And so this is also a dangling modifier mistake. And so when they ask on the quiz, what kind of error is in this sentence? You're going to say, it's a dangling modifier mistake. Second kind of modifiers, misplaced modifier. This is when your modifier is placed in the wrong place in the sentence. So misplaced modifiers occurs when a modifier is placed incorrectly in the sentence. And actually these are also taken directly from the quiz, so you have to memorize that these are all misplaced modifiers. So on the quiz, they're going to ask you, what kind of error is this? Same kind of question. It's going to ask you, what kind of error is in this sentence? How do we fix this sentence? And so here, the patient was referred to a therapist with severe psychological problems. Oh, so does that mean that you're going to go to your therapist and she has a severe psychological problem? No. You have to, this modifier is in the wrong place. So here the correct answer is the patient is the one with severe psychological problems, not the therapist. So with severe psychological problems has to be placed into, so that's what's called a misplaced modifier. When the modifier with severe psychological problems needs to be placed next to the noun it correctly modifies. So the patient with severe psychological problems was referred to a therapist. So that's the correct answer. And so here this is known as a misplaced modifier error. So I would write misplaced modifier error. The new employee will take the front office wearing the brown suit. Oh, so your front office wears a brown suit? No. it's the new employee, so you have to change. Wearing the brown suit is in the wrong place in the sentence, and the correct sentence would be, let's see, well, I can't write it in because it wouldn't fit on this slide, but the new employee wearing the brown suit will take the front office. So this is a misplaced modifier. My uncle just watches one television station. What kind of error is in this sentence? And so once again, my uncle watches just one. So just is the one that's in the wrong place. So here you have to say my uncle watches just, goes over here, just one television station. And so this is also a misplaced modifier. I will be on the phone making appointments today. And so here, the phone is going to make appointments for you today. No, you're the one making the appointments. And so here I would say, I will be making appointments today on the phone. On her way home, Jan found a gold man's watch. Now, so here gold is in the wrong place. So on her way home, Jan found a man's gold watch. So gold should go right over here. Right where my pointer is where the gold should be. So when the modifier is misplaced, then this is known as a misplaced modifier error. So in your quiz, it's going to ask what kind of error is in this sentence, and then you know that this is all of these sentences are all misplaced modifiers because the modifier is in the wrong place. Misplaced modifier. So all of these are all misplaced. Misplaced modifier. Oops. Okay, so all of these are misplaced modifiers. The key to correcting misplaced or dangling modifiers is make sure the doer of the action is named. Make sure the modifier is placed near the word it modifies. Amen to that. So here you would say, the torn student's book lay on the desk. No, the student is not torn. Here you would put torn next to the book. The student's torn book lay on the desk. So here you want to place the modifier near the word it modifies, which in this case is book. Sentence fragments. And so here you have sentence fragments are missing parts of the sentence, like a subject or verb or complete thought. A sentence fragment is an incomplete sentence. A sentence fragment does not express a complete thought. A dependent clause not attached to an independent clause is a sentence fragment. More examples of sentence fragments. In a fragment, the subject or the predicate is missing. A fragment leaves the reader wondering, what about it? What happened? So here's an example of a fragment. Broke the glass. This is a fragment. Who broke the glass? So the subject is missing. So the correct answer is the dog broke the glass. Fragment, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So what about Mr. and Mrs. Smith? So the predicate and the verb and object is missing. So the correct answer would be Mr. and Mrs. Smith are old people. So Mr. and Mrs. Smith is the subject, are is the verb, old is the adjective, old people together, that's all an object. So subject, verb, object, this becomes a simple sentence. Here are some quiz questions on sentence fragments. And so on the quiz, they're going to ask you, is this a complete sentence or is this a sentence fragment? Okay, so on the quiz, they're going to ask you, is this or is this a sentence fragment? And obviously, not a coworker or secretary. Is that a fragment or a complete sentence? Obviously, that is a fragment. And not sound like a faker. Is that a fragment or a complete sentence? It's not a complete thought. The reason why it's a fragment is because it's not a complete thought. It doesn't make sense. If I were just to say to you, hey, and not sound like a faker, You'd be like, what? What does that mean? So that's one way, easy way to tell that if something doesn't make sense or cannot stand by itself, then that means it is a sentence fragment. So here, and not sound like a faker is a fragment. When he is fat is a dependent clause, not a complete thought. Also, it's a sentence fragment. If a person talks to a coworker who doesn't like him or her, that's also a sentence fragment. So you need to know that for the quiz. If I were to say to you, if a person talks to a coworker who doesn't like him, and then I suddenly stop and you're like waiting for the rest of the sentence. So whenever you have a sentence and you got to wait for the rest of it and you don't understand what's going on, then you know it's a sentence fragment. So is this a complete sentence or a fragment? And you have to remember that's not a complete thought, it's a fragment. Run-on sentences. A run-on sentence is two or more sentences written as one. A sentence can contain more than one thought as long as it is punctuated correctly. A run-on sentence occurs when ideas are joined together incorrectly. A comma splice is when you use a comma instead of a period at the end of a sentence. A comma splice occurs when two independent clauses are joined with a comma instead of a conjunction. Just add fanboys to fix the comma splice. So here, when you have two sentences joined together by a comma, that's not right, right? John ate dinner. So you would correct this by, I'll just do it, see? Oops. Okay. So John ate dinner, and then you're supposed to put a period over there, and then you're supposed to capitalize the first letter. He went to the restaurant. Now the sentence is correct. But when you have a run-on, that's when you have an unnecessary comma there, and you got two sentences that come together. That's not supposed to be like that. Okay? So if you want it, there are many ways in which you can correct this. So a comma splice means an unnecessary comma. And so you can correct it by saying John ate dinner, comma, and he went to the restaurant. Or you can correct it by John ate dinner, period, he went to the restaurant. Another way of correcting it would be correct, when John ate dinner, he went to the restaurant. So you can convert it either as two simple sentences, John ate dinner, period, he went to the restaurant, or you can convert it into a complex sentence. When John ate dinner, he went to the restaurant. That sort of thing. But you cannot have simply John ate dinner, comma, he went to the restaurant, and then put in an unnecessary comma there. That's known as a run-on sentence, when you have two sentences that come together and you're missing a conjunction or you're missing a period. So you need to know that for your quiz. Fused sentence is when you have two sentences with no period after the first sentence. So the difference between a comma splice means an unnecessary comma, and then a fused sentence means that you're missing your period. There's no period there. It's not there. So a fused sentence means no period, whereas a comma splice means you have unnecessary comma. Now both a fused sentence and a comma splice, both of these are all run-on sentences, just so you know. A run-on sentence consists of either you're missing your comma, you're putting in a comma that's unnecessary, or you have, so there are two kinds of run-on sentences. You have comma splice, in which you have an unnecessary comma, or you have a fused sentence in which you're missing your period. Where's the period here? And so John ate dinner, and this is a fused sentence because it's fused together. It means that they're connected together and they're running on to each other by mistake. And so here you have a fused sentence, and then here you have a comma splice. So then just like with a comma splice, you correct it by going John ate dinner, period, he went to the restaurant. John who ate dinner went to the restaurant. John who went to the restaurant, okay, that's just me playing around with who. But basically all you have to know is that a fused sentence is when you have two sentences with no period after the first sentence. That's called a fused sentence. And this is also a run-on sentence. And I don't know why this is, yeah, this is also a run-on sentence. Run-on sentence. And a run-on sentence. And here. So quiz questions about incomplete sentences or sentence fragments. So here you have some comma splice examples from your quiz. The can of mushroom soup must have spoiled. It was bulging at the top. You have an unnecessary comma over here, and here you have a run-on. The correct would be the can of mushroom soup must have spoiled, comma, period, it was bulging at the top. And so in order to correct it, you take away the comma and you capitalize it was bulging at the top. I respect my parents, comma, I resent their attempts to choose a career for me. So then you don't need a comma over here. If you want to correct it, you have to put a period after parents. Fused sentence examples. The most popular language in the world is Chinese. More than 1 billion people speak it. And so here you're missing a comma. And so you're missing a period. So in order to fix this, you need to put a period there, and then you need to put a period here to correct it, and then you need to capitalize it. Now it's correct. Now it's not a run-on sentence. But as soon as I get rid of the period and I get rid of the, then it is a run-on sentence, fused sentence. So on your quiz, it's going to ask you, is this a complete sentence, or is this a complete sentence or a run-on sentence? I believe those are the two choices. Complete sentence would be A. Is this a complete sentence or a run-on sentence? And it is a run-on sentence because it's missing a period. What kind of run-on sentence? It's a fused sentence. So basically there are two kinds of run-on sentences: comma splice or fused sentence. George knew the answer to the last essay question. He didn't have enough time to write his answer. This is also a fused sentence because George knew the answer to the last essay question, but he didn't have enough time to write his. So if you put in a but here and a comma, that makes it a correct sentence. Right now it's a fused sentence because it's missing its period. Or I could correct it by putting a period here, and then I could correct it by saying, now it's a correct sentence. But because it's missing a period, then that's not correct. Or I could correct it by putting a but. So if I put in a comma, remember that when you have fanboys, you always have a period before the fanboys. So if I say George knew the answer to the last question, comma, but he didn't have enough time to write his response, that's correct. That's a correct sentence. And obviously this sentence is missing everything, and so therefore it is a run-on sentence. We're getting almost to the very end of this quiz, so just hang on a little longer. What is a possessive subject? Which sentence, and so in the quiz it's going to ask you which sentence demonstrates a possessive subject. And remember that subjects come before the verb. Use apostrophe S to show ownership. The China doll's dress was a sunny yellow. So the China doll's dress is the possessive subject because you see the apostrophe S. Whose dress is it? It belongs to the doll. The dress belongs to the doll, the China doll, so that's why it's known as a possessive subject. Jack's hat was bright red. And so Jack's hat is a possessive subject because who owns the hat? Jack owns the hat. Therefore, Jack's hat is a possessive subject, and a subject always comes before the verb. Susan's shoes were too small for her. So who owns the shoes? Susan owns the shoes. So therefore, Susan's shoes is a possessive subject. And so on your quiz, you need to know that the China doll's dress, is a possessive subject. So this is the one sentence that's actually on your quiz. What is a possessive object? And so a possessive object, an object comes after the verb. I live in Darren's house. So in this case, it's Darren's house is not only a possessive object, it's also the object of a preposition in. Remember that prepositions show where something is. So possessive object would be I live in Darren's house. Do you believe that cooking is a woman's work or woman's work? And so woman's work is the possessive object in the sentence. All right, so now we're going to get into the actual quiz in which all the answers are not there. And so if you can score a 100% on your quiz, on the practice quiz, then you're ready to take the real quiz. And so here, the new employee will take the front office wearing the brown suit. What kind of error is in this sentence? Is this a dangling modifier, misplaced modifier, or it's a perfect sentence? I'll give you a minute. So the answer is, this is a misplaced modifier. The new employee wearing the brown suit will take the front office. So if you have to change wearing the brown suit and you have to put it over here, that means that the modifier is in the wrong place, and therefore the modifier is misplaced. Misplaced simply means, it's like when I misplace my keys. I put the keys in the fridge by mistake. So that's one way you can remember misplaced means that the modifier is in the wrong place. And you have to put the modifier somewhere else next to what it modifies in order for it to be correct. Number 2, choose the correct sentence. I can't seem to find the keys. This is the first time you weren't late. If you aren't going to make it, please call. Okay, so I gave you a couple of seconds. You can tell this is not correct because here this is a contraction. So you're missing an apostrophe, and here you're missing an apostrophe. Okay, that's why A and B are not correct. So A and B are incorrect. And so that means that the last sentence, if you aren't going to make it, please call. So therefore number 2 is C. And not sound like a faker. Is this a complete sentence or a fragment? This is an easy one. It's a fragment because it doesn't make sense by itself. Which sentence below is correct? At the age of 4, my father taught me to ride a bike. When I was 4, my father taught me to ride a bike. And then you know that it's this one, B. When I was 4. My father taught me to ride a bike, because at the age, does this mean your father was 4 years old when he taught you to ride a bike? No. So the answer is when you were 4 years old. This is actually a dangling modifier because it's missing the subject, when I was 4. The most popular language in the world is Chinese. More than 1 billion people speak it. Is this a complete sentence or a run-on? And this is a run-on because here you're supposed to have a period and you're supposed to have a capital M. But because it has neither or, and this is a run-on sentence. Which sentence is correct? Linda took her daughter to the doctor who has a high fever, or Linda took her daughter who has a high fever to the doctor. Now, which one makes sense? Would you take your daughter to a sick doctor who has a high fever? No. So obviously, the answer is B. Linda's daughter has the high fever. This is a misplaced modifier, number 6. So the answer is B. My uncle just watches one television station. What kind of error is in this sentence? And so here, okay, so the answer is my uncle watches just You got to put the just over here. I think I read it correctly by mistake. I was supposed to have read it as my uncle just watches one television station, when the correct answer is supposed to be my uncle watches. Because you've got to place just in another spot, and this is a misplaced modifier. Anytime you have to change the modifier location, then it is a misplaced modifier. George knew the answer to the last essay question. He didn't have enough time to write his response. Is this a complete sentence or a run-on sentence? And because this is missing a period, this is a run-on sentence. Walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. What kind of error is in this sentence? So your car walked on the sidewalk? No. So therefore, when it's missing a subject, this is a dangling modifier. So correct answer would be, while I was walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. So when it's missing a subject, it's a dangling modifier. First of all, one must be sure to speak directly to the boss. Is this a complete sentence or a fragment? This is a complete sentence, because here you have a subject, you have a verb, and you have an infinitive phrase or an object. So subject, verb, object, you have a complete sentence. While working, an earthquake shook the building. What kind of error is in this sentence? This is missing a subject. It should be, while I was working, an earthquake shook the building. And so because we're missing a subject, this is a dangling modifier. In other words, it leaves the sentence dangling, literally, because it doesn't make sense. That's how you can remember it. I didn't have to change or move the modifier around in this particular sentence. So that's how you know it's a dangling modifier. After all, the earthquake can't just get up and go to work. So it's you have to get up and go to work. So it's missing a subject. Number 12. If a person talks to a coworker who doesn't like him or her, is this a complete sentence or is this a fragment? It's a fragment because here you have a dependent clause starting with the subordinating conjunction if. And it's not a complete thought. Number 13. Not to a coworker or secretary. Is this a complete sentence or a fragment? It's a fragment because it's missing a verb and it's missing an object. And it doesn't make sense by itself. Number 14. The can of mushroom soup must have spoiled. It was bulging at the top. Is this a complete sentence or is this a run-on? It is a run-on because here you're missing a period. And you need to put a period after spoiled, and then you need to capitalize it was bulging at the top. If you do that, then it is a complete sentence. But since both of those are missing, therefore it's a run-on. Modifiers are words that offer details and descriptions about an object, should be placed as far away from the object as possible, should be deleted from the sentence. And so modifiers should always be placed close to the subject as possible. And so modifiers offer details and descriptions about an object. In other words, modifiers describe whatever it is that's in the sentence. So if I were to say, John, who is French is a modifier that explains who John is. Okay, so modifiers always describe or modify and offer details and descriptions about an object. So the answer is A. George knew the answer to the last essay question. He didn't have enough time to write his response. Is this a complete sentence or a fragment or a run-on? And in this case, it is a run-on because it's missing a period. See, so it is a run-on sentence. So the correct answer is B. This is it. We're getting to the last part of this quiz. 2 more questions and you're done. Does the following sentence contain a misplaced modifier or a dangling modifier? I will be on the phone making appointments today. Oh, so your phone is going to grow hands and going to make appointments? No. And so here I've got to move the modifier to I will be making appointments today on the phone. So if I have to move this around in order for this to be correct, then that means that this is a misplaced modifier, because the correct answer should be I will be making appointments today on the phone. That's the correct answer. And so did you notice that I had to change the making appointments and I had to move that? Let's see. Yeah. So I will be on the phone making appointments today. And so did you notice that I had to move I will be making appointments into here. So if I have to move the modifier around, then that is known as a misplaced modifier. So this is the correct answer. This is the correct sentence. So therefore that this sentence is not correct. Okay. So this is a misplaced modifier. I respect my parents. I resent their attempts to choose a career for me. So here, I respect my parents. This is a comma splice, because here you're using an unnecessary comma. You need to put in a period, and voila. Now it's now it's a complete sentence. Now it's correct. It's actually 2 complete sentences. But because it's missing a comma, therefore this is a run-on sentence. So if this is the hardest quiz out of I think the 4 or 5 quizzes. So quiz 5 and quiz 7 are the hardest quizzes. So that's what my students tell me out of this entire class. And so if you have any questions or if you need extra help or explanation, you can come to the Zoom session and then you can ask questions about what you did not understand from this PowerPoint. Because when I give my Zoom session, I will give this exact same lesson over again. And then at that time, you can ask, wait a minute, when I was going over the PowerPoint, I didn't understand such and such, that sort of thing. So I suggest that you look over this PowerPoint video first before you attend the Zoom session. That way you already know what questions you want to ask in advance. So study the PowerPoint first, get to know the week 7 practice quiz first. That way when you attend a Zoom session, it will all be review. And then if there are any parts of this PowerPoint you don't understand, then when you attend the Zoom session, you can ask. Or if you want a special Zoom session on Wednesdays, I have my office hours from 11 a.m. Pacific to 5 p.m. Pacific, and then we can have either one-on-one or a group session where everybody's together all asking, can you do the week 7? I have questions. I looked over but this is only for people who already looked over their PowerPoint and simply have questions. I'm not going to go over the whole thing during the office hours. So during office hours, I'm just going to answer whatever questions people have. And then during the Friday Zoom session, that's when I go over the same exact lesson for the entire class, because some people learn better watching a PowerPoint while other people need active interaction. This is why you're like, why does she repeat everything over and over again? And like I said in quiz 1, different modalities. Some of you are visual learners, some of you are audio learners, and some of you are kinesthetic learners. That is, you have to be in social interaction in a Zoom call to learn something. So I'm hoping that I've covered all 3 angles. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. And this ends this PowerPoint on the week 7 quiz.